The popular narrative insists that Aston Martin's disastrous 2026 campaign is a death sentence for their championship hopes. But the specific 2027 regulation changes regarding the 58-42 power unit split and the 300mm forward floor shift are actually reshaping the team's future by forcing an architectural reset that would have been impossible without this current failure. Everyone assumes the Honda vibration crisis is purely a mechanical defect to be fixed. Yet the real story is whether this catastrophic reliability collapse has inadvertently created the exact developmental pressure cooker Adrian Newey needs to exploit the new rules better than teams with stable but stagnant 2026 packages. But here is the tension that nobody in the paddock can quite resolve right now. Can a team currently burning through hybrid batteries and lacking spare parts genuinely pivot to become a mature organization capable of winning under new regulations? Or is the optimism we are hearing simply a necessary public facade, while the factory quietly struggles to keep the current car running? That question hangs over every single lap they complete this season. The vibration issues have been severe enough that Fernando Alonso had to physically let go of the steering wheel mid-corner at the Chinese Grand Prix because the low-frequency oscillations were transmitting through the entire chassis. This was not a minor setup complaint. It was a safety-critical failure that forced the team down to its last two working hybrid batteries with absolutely no spares available early in the year. So why does Newey insist this trauma is beneficial? Because the 2027 technical directive confirms a massive change to the front floor bid leading edge position alongside a 5% fuel flow increase, creating a blank canvas where past data is irrelevant. Teams that dominated 2026 are now trapped optimizing around legacy concepts, while Aston Martin has been violently stripped of any complacency. The engine did not fit the original packaging. Newey had to redesign the whole car architecture mid-season. That pain is now the foundation for 2027. Yet the scale of the current deficit makes this transformation incredibly hard to believe. Paddock estimates on the power gap vary wildly depending on who you ask and what metric they use. Some sources cite a 60 horsepower thermal deficit against Red Bull. Others whisper about a 136 horsepower energy recovery shortfall compared to Mercedes. Honda's own technical lead, Shintaro Orihara, confirmed only that performance in Barcelona was definitely poor compared to other manufacturers, refusing to validate any specific number. This uncertainty is the twist. We cannot treat these horsepower figures as verified facts when the manufacturer itself will only admit to qualitative underperformance. The data is fractured. Estimates contradict. Nobody knows the true delta. And even if we isolate the engine problems entirely, the AMR26 was still measured at 3.5 seconds off the fastest qualifying pace at certain points, proving that chassis correlation failures share the blame equally with the power unit. That 3.5-second gap is the ghost in the machine that no engine upgrade can fully exorcise. It forces us to confront an uncomfortable reality about the AMR26 that goes far beyond dyno numbers or deployment maps. The chassis itself has been compromised by the very crisis everyone wants to blame solely on Honda. Adrian Newey admitted he had to change the whole car because the power unit simply did not fit as originally packaged, meaning the aerodynamic philosophy was dictated by mechanical survival rather than performance optimization. You cannot develop downforce when you are redesigning mounting points mid-season. You cannot refine suspension geometry when the baseline vibration signature keeps shifting. So where does that leave the team right now? Stuck in a development dead zone where every lap is a diagnostic test rather than a performance run. The visceral reality of this compromise played out in real time at the Chinese Grand Prix. We already noted Alonso releasing the steering wheel, but the broader context of that moment reveals just how deeply the low-frequency vibrations infiltrated the car's structural integrity. These were not isolated jolts. They were continuous oscillations, severe enough to threaten component fatigue across the entire hybrid system. At one point early in the season, the team was operating with only 2 functional hybrid batteries and 0 spares, a logistical cliff edge that made completing full race distances genuinely uncertain. Reliability consumed all available engineering bandwidth. Performance development ceased entirely. Mileage accumulation stopped. The feedback loop between track data and factory simulation broke down completely because the car could not run consistently enough to generate valid correlation points. New parts arrived, tests failed. Data remained inconclusive. This operational paralysis explains why Paddock whispers about horsepower deficits remain so inconsistent. Without clean back-to-back testing, nobody can separate thermal engine losses from energy deployment inefficiencies or chassis-induced drag penalties. One outlet frames the gap at 90 horsepower. Another insists it is closer to 136 when including recovery systems. A third suggests 60 horsepower against Red Bull's thermal benchmark alone. But remember what Orihara actually said via blog, F1LivePulse.com. He confirmed only that Barcelona performance was definitely poor compared to other manufacturers. No number, no breakdown, just a qualitative admission that left analysts guessing. That ambiguity is not accidental. It reflects a team still searching for root causes while competing under regulations that demand precision. So we have to ask whether any amount of Zandvoort spec upgrades can truly reset this trajectory before 2027 arrives. Honda has confirmed its revised power unit hit internal targets ahead of the Dutch GP debut, with reported potential gains discussed anywhere from 20 to 50 horsepower depending on which source you trust. But again, no single figure has been independently verified by multiple outlets. Motorsport Week and MotorBiscuit both exercised caution, noting only that internal benchmarks were met without publishing confirmed output numbers. This upgrade might close the gap partially. It might restore basic reliability, but it cannot undo months of lost chassis development or rebuild the correlation models that collapsed under vibration-induced testing restrictions. The 2026 season is effectively written off as a learning exercise, which brings us back to why 2027 matters more than any individual race result this year. Picture this for a second. You are an architect who has spent 2 years designing a skyscraper around a specific steel beam, only to discover during construction that the beam is 3 inches wider than the blueprint specified and vibrates at a frequency that cracks concrete. You cannot simply swap the beam. You have to redraw every load-bearing wall, relocate every elevator shaft, and reinforce the foundation while the building is already half erected and swaying in the wind. That is exactly what Adrian Newey faced when the Honda power unit's real-world physical characteristics diverged from the digital packaging data Aston Martin had used to design the AMR26. The engine did not fit, the vibration signature was wrong, the cooling requirements shifted. Every aerodynamic surface downstream of the intake had to be reprofiled not for downforce but for mechanical clearance and structural damping. This cascading redesign explains why the 3.5-second qualifying deficit persists, even when you account for the most pessimistic horsepower estimates. The chassis is not a refined racing platform. It is a compromised adaptation built around containment rather than exploitation. When Newey stated via F1 Oversteer.com that he had to change the whole car because the engine didn't fit, he was describing a fundamental architectural surrender. Aerodynamic development requires stable baseline assumptions. Correlation models demand predictable mechanical behavior. Neither existed once the vibration crisis forced reactive engineering over proactive optimization. Wind tunnel parts arrived outdated before installation. Simulation tools generated misleading outputs because the physical car no longer matched its digital twin. Testing sessions became damage assessment exercises rather than performance validation runs. The numbers bear this out starkly. Even isolating for the power unit entirely, telemetry showed the AMR26 losing time in sectors where engine output is irrelevant. High-speed cornering deficits, braking zone instability, higher degradation patterns inconsistent with predicted wear models. These are chassis problems born from a development cycle hijacked by reliability triage. The race explicitly framed this duality, arguing the car is as bad as the engine and rejecting any narrative that places sole blame on Honda. That distinction matters enormously for 2027 because it means the regulation reset addresses both failure modes simultaneously. The new 50A42 ICE-to-electric split reduces electrical system complexity that contributed to hybrid battery failures. The 300mm forward bib relocation creates fresh packaging freedom that eliminates the compromised mounting architecture haunting the current car. The 5% dual flow increase shifts development focus toward thermal efficiency rather than deployment recovery strategies that exposed Honda's energy management weaknesses. Newey confirmed on August 3rd via GP blog. That serious work on the 2026 car did not begin until April 2025, a late start that compounded the packaging crisis. For 2027, the team is now in early research stages, working through big architectural decisions about engine positioning within the wheelbase and chassis placement relative to the new floor regulations. This timeline advantage exists precisely because 2026 forced abandonment of dead-end development paths. Teams still chasing points this season remain tethered to legacy concepts. Aston Martin has been liberated by failure. The pain of watching Alonso manage a vibrating steering wheel through Chinese GP corners purchased clarity about what does not work. That clarity is worth more than any single upgrade package could deliver. Remember how this all started, with the assertion that the 2027 regulation changes regarding the 5842 power unit split and the 300mm forward floor shift are reshaping Aston Martin's future by forcing an architectural reset. We can now see exactly how those specific technical parameters function as the mechanism for that transformation. The confirmed FIA package mandates a 58-42 split favoring internal combustion over electric power, directly reversing the extreme electrical dependency that caused such catastrophic hybrid battery attrition in 2026. This is not a minor adjustment. It fundamentally alters the packaging priorities that destroyed the AMR26's development cycle. Combined with a 5% increase in fuel flow, the regulations shift engineering resources away from desperate energy recovery management toward thermal efficiency optimization, where Honda has historically demonstrated stronger competency. But the most transformative element remains the chassis side change Newey highlighted via GP blog. The leading edge of the front floor bib, often called the T-tray, moves forward by approximately 300 millimeters. This geometric revision unlocks entirely new ride height philosophies that were physically impossible under current constraints. Teams can now run lower front-end platforms without triggering the stall characteristics that plagued ground effect cars since 2022. For Aston Martin specifically, this eliminates the compromised mounting architecture that forced reactive redesigns when the Honda engine didn't fit original packaging assumptions. The clean sheet nature of this regulation means no team carries forward legacy advantages or inherited flaws. Past correlation data becomes obsolete. Historical development pathways lose relevance. Every competitor starts from identical regulatory coordinates. Newey stated explicitly that because the team has been forced to grow up quickly over the last 12 months, they are in a much better place to capitalize on these regulation changes than they would have been a year ago. He described the organization as significantly more mature now, leaving him very optimistic about what is to come. That optimism stems directly from having survived the crucible of 2026's dual crises. The vibration problems exposed structural weaknesses in testing protocols. The horsepower deficit revealed gaps in simulation fidelity. The reliability failures stress-tested supply chain resilience. Each failure mode identified a vulnerability that 2027's clean regulatory slate allows them to address proactively rather than reactively. Teams that enjoyed stable 2026 campaigns face the opposite challenge. They must unlearn optimized habits built around soon-to-be obsolete technical frameworks. Their maturity was earned through success, not survival. That distinction may prove decisive when everyone converges on new architectural solutions under identical rules. The question now becomes whether Fernando Alonso believes this reset justifies extending his commitment through the transition period. Spanish press reports via Marca indicate he drove a hard bargain during negotiations, demanding an annual salary of €40 million to extend his stay.